This is it. The 2016 Formula One Series champion Nico Rosberg is the son of Keke Rosberg, he himself being the 1982 Formula One Series champion, which makes me wonder the what-ifs of racing, wondering what would happen if things turned out the so-called natural way. But the natural way of racing is reflective on real life, since racing is ran by real human beings. But the human factor is sometimes overlooked. It's the people that makes racing, from the fans to the teams. So congrats to Nico Rosberg on doing a very special and rare achievement, and it's only the Hill family, Graham and Damon, have done the same. Father and son legacies are a common thing in racing, but it's hardly that you get a good legacy, let alone great ones. You can have a Petty legacy in NASCAR, or the Labonte brothers, but that's not the norm for Autosports. What tends to happen is you can have an Unser family rise up, or the Villeneuve family, but they start or end in tragedy. So when you have a Ned and Dale Jarrett, or you can watch the Earnhardt family battle each other out for the victory, you just gotta soak it up, because that stuff is rare in racing. The norm is what I call the Wallace way of legacy, and as you have Rusty Wallace, a bona fide legend in NASCAR, with the 89 Series Championship, 55 career wins, 36 pole position starts, 349 top 10s, in 706 starts. But his brothers Mike and Kenny Wallace have 0 wins in the NASCAR Cup Series, and his son Steven is hardly a glimpse of what his father was. But lots of families in autosports are just not that lucky. Take the Allisons. Donnie ran 242 races and finds 10 victories, 18 pole position starts, and 115 top 10s. Or Bobby Allison, the 1983 Cup champion, the 1980 IROC champion. He won Daytona 3 times. He's the 4-time most popular driver, and he ran 718 races with 84 wins, 58 poles, and 446 top 10 finishes, with 336 of which were top 5s. That's just amazing. Over half of his races he finished in the top 10, and about half the time he finished in the top 5. Probably in the hunt for top 25 greatest racers in all autosports of all time. But in 1988, he hits the outside wall at the famed Pocono International. I think it was just going into the tri-oval turn, but from the video, you don't get much. Apparently, he had a tire going down at the start of the race, and just before he completed the first lap, the tire gave way, and he hit the outside wall, then is hit in the driver's side door by Giacomo Giacomo. Allison was hit so hard, he was put into a coma and was forced to retire from autosports. So the family had an already standing legacy when Davey Allison, the older son of Bobby, exploded onto the scene in 1987, taking the Rookie of the Year and snatching up 2 victories, even taking one from Dale Earnhardt at Talladega. The young Allison even finishes second to his father at the Daytona 500 the following year in 1988. The force was definitely strong with this one, as Davey would get 2 wins in each of the next 2 years until 1991, where he kills it and earns 5 victories, winning at the Coca-Cola 600, then at Sonoma, Michigan, Rockingham, and Phoenix, finishing 3rd in the points behind Ricky Rudd and Dale Earnhardt. But it's around this time Clifford, Davey's younger brother, was entering what at the time was the Busch Grand National Series. He was practicing at Michigan in August of 1992, entering turn 3 when he lost control and backed their left rear of the car into the outside wall, going probably around 160 miles an hour. But when the car hits the wall, the momentum forces the left side of the car to hit the wall in a snapping sort of way. NASCAR had been getting faster and faster, just like every other auto sport. But just like every other auto sport, safety in the cars was not up to par. I mean, for the time it was alright. Anyway now, this is just a theory, but the seat may have broken in Clifford's car. I read that in an article. It said that first responders stated that the seat was broken in the car. So I'm going to assume that this means the seat mount was broke. Either way, reports state that he was dead instantly. Imagine being in your car on the freeway, and you spin into the center divider, and your seat breaks. You might go bouncing around like a pinball if you're going fast enough. Now imagine that at 160 miles an hour with only sheet metal and roll bars, while strapped into what looks like a plastic ejection seat. Remember, this is in an era where everyone was still wearing open-face helmets. You should know that Dan Gurney was the first to wear the first full-face helmet in 1968 at the Indy 500. And until the mid-90s, drivers fashioned the classic Earnhardt look. Despite the gloom of the 1992 season, Davey Allison would still manage to win 5 races that year, also finishing 3rd in points behind Bill Elliott and the 1992 champion Alan Kulwicki. Something happened in this era from 1985 to 1995 because race earnings would climb over the $1 million mark and drivers would become very wealthy indeed. Drivers start buying planes and helicopters, but you gotta remember these are not your pampered celebrity movie star types. These guys are race car drivers, most from humble beginnings, so inevitably they would get their own licenses instead of paying a pilot to fly them all the time. I mean, they are professional race car drivers. Who would you rather fly you, some Joe Schmo pilot guy from the paper or the 1992 Winston Cup champion? So in the beginning of the 1993 season, Kulwicki buys his own plane. Remember, Alan Kulwicki was the owner of his own team, so buying the plane was probably a real good investment. I mean, he is now the reigning series champion. Lots of places to go, lots of sponsor obligations, test here, fly mechanics there, you could imagine. And on his way from a sponsor's promotional event in Knoxville, April 1st, 1993, to the 6th race of the season at Bristol. So it's in Tennessee. It's a short flight. He wasn't the pilot, but Kulwicki's plane went down with 4 on board. Some articles say 5, but it goes down just outside the Tri-City Airport. On approach for landing, drivers Rusty Wallace and Dale Earnhardt arrived minutes before the crash and awaited in agony as their friend was in the fireball visible from the airstrip. Apparently the pilot didn't run the engine de-icing procedures correctly. I don't know. I'm not a pilot. But just like that, the reigning series champ is gone. Kulwicki had 5 wins, 75 top 10s, and 24 poles in 207 races. That July, Davey Allison would attempt to land his helicopter at the Talladega Superspeedway to watch his friend Neil Bonnet and Neil's son David test a car. As he attempted to land in the infield, Davey's helicopter nosed up and suddenly crashed into the ground. If you've seen any helicopter crash, they're not pretty, and are dangerous for any living creature nearby. You have propellers flying and breaking and splitting all over the place. It's terrible. The NTSB blamed Allison's inexperience in the accident, and he would sustain a head injury he would die from the next morning. Davey would have 19 victories in 191 races, 66 top 5s, 92 top 10s, and 14 poles. He would earn over $6 million in his career. I was 8 at the time, and I grew up a Davey Allison fan. I remember this day. It was a sad time, and auto racing is filled with tragic events in its history. But racing is a glory-driven sport with great stories to tell. Remember, I started this by talking about the 2016 Formula One Series champion Nico Rosberg, and how it's rare to see a father and son have real success in the top series in autosports. Racing for Williams, Keke Rosberg would reap success, earning 5 wins, 18 podiums, and 5 pole position starts, also snatching up the championship in '82. But the '82 season was strange. You must remember that Ferrari was probably the team to beat in 1982 all in all, but it was tragedy that would prove the season's true identity. In race 5 at the Belgian Grand Prix, in the final qualifying session, Gilles Villeneuve, a 6-time winner with 13 podiums in 5 years, was involved in a fatal accident. This is the father of the 1997 Formula One Series champion, Jacques Villeneuve. 8 minutes left in the session, Villeneuve caught Jochen Mass traveling way slower than Gilles through Butte, a left-handed bend just before the Terre-Lemenbach, a high-speed double right-hand section of the track. Gilles was traveling more than 125 miles per hour when he and the slower Jochen Mass had the same thought: just move right, out of the racing line. As they both made the move, the Ferrari of Villeneuve hits the back of Mass and launches like a jet plane into the air for about 100 yards before nosediving into the ground and disintegrating and somersaulting along the edge of the track. Gilles, still strapped to his seat but without his helmet, is thrown 50 yards further of what is left of his Ferrari into a chain link fence. Racer John Watson of McLaren and Derek Warwick of Toleman Hart stopped on the scene, and when they got to Gilles and pulled him from the fence, he was alive but not breathing, and he was blue in the face. He was transferred by helicopter to University St. Raphael Hospital, where he died of a neck fracture. You can see the video on YouTube. I don't recommend it, but you could still see it nonetheless. Ferrari would not start the race, but went on to post 2 straight podiums at the following 2 races with single driver Didier Pironi at Monaco finishing 2nd, and in Detroit, where he would finish 3rd. Pironi would start the race on pole at the 3rd race, following Gilles Villeneuve's death at the somber Canadian Grand Prix. Remember, Gilles Villeneuve was a French-Canadian who was the first person to win at the track during its grand opening at the Isle de Notre Dame circuit in 1978, just 4 years prior. So it's symbolic almost for the Ferrari teammate and sole Ferrari car to start on pole. Remember, he is the only Ferrari out there, and he's holding his own. But Pironi stalls at the start of the race. Remember, he starts from the front, from a stop position, and the whole field goes flying past him. And as the guys from the back of the grid get to him, he is hit from behind by a 23-year-old driver making his first actual start in the Formula One lineup. It's an Italian driver named Riccardo Paletti. At first you don't think much of the collision, and you can't see much from the front view angle from the front stretch camera. But Paletti was traveling around 110 miles per hour, and the impact crushes the nose of Paletti's car, pinning Riccardo against his driver's seat with the steering wheel, and the blow renders him unconscious. Footage of Pironi's car after all this shows the nose of the young Italian's car seemed to be lodged inside the space between the wheel and the rear wing mount, where the rear suspension would be. Didier Pironi got out of his car and tried to assist Sid Watkins, the FIA's head doctor, in trying to stabilize the non-responsive Paletti. But as they tried to help him, the fuel from the destroyed race car ignites, and if you check this out on YouTube, it's completely engulfed in flames. So they had to abort the extraction of the young Italian driver now trapped in the fire. All this while his mother watches in the stands. You can see this firsthand, as there was a cameraman in front of Riccardo seconds before the car goes up, and then the camera goes back to the front stretch camera. The safety personnel tried their best to smother the flames, but apparently the extinguishing agent could have helped smother Riccardo as well, that along with chest injuries. But by the time they could check on his pulse, he had none, and it would take 25 minutes for them to cut him out of the car. They tried to revive him in the helicopter, but he was dead minutes after arriving at the Royal Victoria Hospital. Doctors said that he had 2 broken legs, and his stomach was filled with blood from a torn aorta. He was probably dead within minutes after the crash, because in addition to the chest injuries, he may have also been poisoned by inhaling the toxic foam used to put out the fire. Crazily enough, the trouble for Ferrari would continue 4 races later during a rainy practice for the German Grand Prix. It had been raining off and on all day, causing the cars to create a mist trail off the back of themselves as they speed around the track, and it can impair visibility in traffic so bad as to force the trailing driver to abandon the racing line. While the Ferrari of Pironi tried passing the Williams driver Derek Daly, Pironi failed to see the Renault of Alain Prost. I couldn't find any film of the crash. I only found the film of him being worked on just after the crash, but that's about it. But in Alain Prost's own words, Pironi's car went straight up into the air, almost 30 meters. I prayed I would stop because I had no brakes. The car flipped and fell apart, much as the Ferrari of Villeneuve did 7 races earlier, and then the car rested along a wall. Nelson Piquet was the first person to be in any position to help the points leader Pironi. From the car, Pironi is yelling at Nelson to get me out, but the Brazilian Piquet loses it at the side of the French driver's legs, and he had to be helped away from the crash site. Screams of "Don't let them take my legs" were heard from the broken Frenchman still trapped bleeding heavily in his cockpit. It took more than a half hour to get him out of the wreckage, but they saved his legs. It took many surgeries over a long period of time, but despite being out for the remainder of the season, Pironi would finish runner-up in the series championship points with 39. Keke Rosberg would finish with 44 points to win the title. 5 years after this, in 1987, Pironi would be killed in a speedboat race after hitting a wake from a large tanker vessel that was passing through the channel they were racing in. His speedboat would flip in a corkscrew kind of way high into the air and crash into the ocean at speeds up to about 100 miles an hour. The 3 men on board did not survive. I just want to say congrats to Nico and on the great legacy his family has. And to the families of the men I mentioned here, my condolences to them, as I am a fan of the sport, and in that manner is the only way in which I would bring them up. So thank you so much for listening, and remember to stay safe out there.